My name is Jessica Martin, and I am the product manager in online learning and training for ACS Publications. Today, I will be introducing you to our latest course called ACS Case Studies for Research Lab Safety. Now, through our research, we've uncovered a need for students entering the research lab for the first time to become comfortable with and knowledgeable on risk assessment for independent research experiments. And while students in teaching laboratories are typically taught the basics of laboratory safety in order to work inside of labs, they are rarely called upon to design their own experiments. And as a result, experimental design, risk assessment, and safety considerations are typically done by someone else. However, once they enter the research lab, as either graduate students or advanced undergraduate students, they find themselves in a much more independent role where they are expected to more deeply understand their science and plan the safe execution of their own experiments. Not only do they need to become more familiar with the resources available, they also need to become more assertive in reaching out to those who can help them plan better, whether that is their PI, other student researchers in the lab, or safety professionals at their institutions. Now, it is also important to appreciate that laboratory safety becomes more complex and nuanced in a research lab. Rather than all students performing the same experiment as in a teaching lab, student researchers are often the only ones performing their particular set of experiments, and they are expected to rise to the challenge of becoming the authority in many situations. And this is why in this course, we have taken the approach of utilizing case studies based on real-world incidents to support these new researchers as they practice thinking more holistically about their science and the laboratory environment. Now, the concept of using case studies to teach lab safety has been discussed by multiple experts in the safety and chemical education community for years. So for this course, we recruited David Lawrence to develop this course based on a research safety course for graduate students that he teaches at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We also recruited Dr. Michael Blaney for his years of safety expertise and Dr. Olivia Williams for her more recent experience in research safety to collaborate on the curation of these modules. Finally, Dr. David Finster, an author of the seminal Laboratory Safety for Chemistry students, participated as an expert reviewer for the course. Now let's go ahead and jump into the actual course itself. So this course kicks off with a module focused on reviewing the basics of risk assessment utilizing the RAMP model. If you're unfamiliar with the RAMP model, this is more of a framework to think about risk assessment that could be applied in any sort of risk assessment activity. Now, as the learner works through this, they will be presented with this screen, and the screen will become very familiar as we will see it pop up in each case study as well, where we have the learner go through each one of the steps. So we have R, which is for recognize the hazards. And in this case, we're giving them an introduction to the many different places and many different resources they can use to recognize hazards in their experiment. A is for assess the risk, and this is where we introduce them to the idea of thinking about both the severity and likelihood of the risks of the hazards that they have recognized within the first step. M then gives them an overview of ways that they can minimize the risks that they have identified. And then finally, P is for prepare for emergencies, and in this case, it's trying to think about all the emergencies that can happen anyway, despite all of this careful planning. Now, this introductory module also goes through and explains the structure of the case studies that I am going to show you now using one of those case studies. So once they complete this introductory module here, it will then unlock the 5 case studies that currently exist within this course. So we have pyrophoric fire, piranha solutions, double trouble, chemical storage mishap, and the elevating lacrimator. The learner can explore the case studies in any order they like. However, they will need to complete all 5 of them in order to claim their certificate of completion. This also gives advisors and educators flexibility in terms of which modules they would like their students to cover and when. So now let's go ahead and jump into one of our case studies. So we're going to use piranha solutions for this example. Now, throughout these case studies, we provide learners a framework for thinking through real-world examples and invite the learner to reflect on the incident throughout. We also strongly encourage learners to use these case studies to engage in conversations about these issues with their PIs, colleagues, and others in their institutions. It is important to note that these case studies do not explicitly teach students how to perform experiments or deal with hazardous waste. In fact, we've made a point to emphasize throughout the course how critical it is for student researchers to learn about the policies, protocols, and procedures within their own institutions so that they are handling things correctly. Within this module, before we jump into the case study story itself, we do a brief RAMP review of the issue at hand. So in this case study, we go through a limited risk assessment for handling piranha solutions. Now, I'm not going to go through every part here. However, I did want to point out a few critical pieces. So we use this particular case study as an opportunity to not only discuss the importance of consulting safety data sheets for individual chemicals, but also to point out that it is important to go beyond safety data sheets when working to recognize hazards of an experiment. For example, neither chemical that goes into a typical piranha solution is explosive. However, the combination does create a potential for an explosion hazard. Additionally, when looking at ways to minimize the risks that have been identified with the hazards that we're dealing with, we make sure to emphasize that it is important at the end of the day to actually consult with the people in your department and safety professionals on your campus to make sure that regulations are being followed. Now, after this brief review of RAMP, we plunge into the case study itself. So now, of course, it is a case study of an incident specifically because things went wrong. Certain decisions were made that, upon reflection, were not the best decisions. Now, as the learner works through this module, they may hear poor decisions get made and unfortunate statements said. And we're going to take a look at this slide here as an example. Now, as you've been seeing play across your screen, we chose to use realistic illustrations in order to show the realities inherent to a lab environment and to engage the learner in the story. We have also used multiple voiceover actors to tell the story from the perspective of the different players in these case studies. So now I'm going to play a little bit of this particular dialogue here so you can get a sense of the storytelling for yourself.
I inherited several filthy sintered glass funnels, and I can't seem to get them clean.
Nothing to be embarrassed about. It's a common problem, and cleaning those funnels can be difficult. What have you tried so far?
I washed them several times with acetone, and it had no effect at all. The funnels are still disgusting.
Oh, that's too bad. Happens all the time. You have lots of options, though. Maybe concentrated sodium hydroxide or various strong acids would work. But if it were my glassware and acetone wasn't working, I wouldn't waste my time with weaker reagents. I'd go straight to piranha solution.
Now, for many folks, Christiana's shortcut isn't all that surprising. And for others, they may be frustrated to hear someone so willing to take that shortcut instead of trying out those weaker reagents first. Now, at key points throughout this case study, we insert formative assessment style questions in which we ask the learner to think about what the players in the case study should have done at this point in the story. So as you can see in this question here, we encourage the learner, after reading the question and the options, to potentially check the scenario if they need to take a look at detail again, and review our limited risk assessment here under the RAMP button before selecting an answer. And then once they've selected an answer, they will then get substantive feedback regarding the different options that were here. And so in this case, I selected the correct answer, so it gave it to me right away. If I select the incorrect answer, it'll give me one more opportunity to go back and select an answer before it gives me that feedback. And then as the case study proceeds, these formative assessment questions give the learner an opportunity to consider what they should do after less than stellar decisions have been made, so that they can also think about the best steps to take in an emergency situation. And so as we're seeing here, even though we recognize that Jeremy probably should have waited until the next day, in fact, he very much should have waited until the next day to try out piranha solution for the first time, he actually proceeds and decides to do it that evening. And so now we can follow him into this next step where he has gone ahead and prepared it, he's used it, and now he's starting to see something a bit suspicious in terms of his waste. And then again, we pause the learner so that they can take an opportunity to think about, if they themselves had made a mistake like this, what's the best response in this next step here where we're faced with a potentially serious incident. And then finally, at the end, after we've completed the story itself, we end with several safety reflection questions. These are designed to get the learner to consider how a more thorough risk assessment could have been useful in preventing the incident discussed. Now, it is not expected that the learner be an expert in a specific subfield of chemistry to work through these case studies, nor is it important whether they work with a particular type of reagent being discussed. What matters here is that they get the opportunity to consider and explore how to react appropriately in a potentially hazardous situation, and that they get used to the idea of referring back to some sort of risk assessment in order to determine their next steps. Through these exercises, they should learn how to appreciate the value of a thorough risk assessment and what components to consider when doing a risk assessment for their own experiments. And of course, we emphasize the importance of including others in their risk assessments so that they can take advantage of the expertise of everyone at their institutions.
What I wanted to do is review some of the common benefits across the entire safety suite. This particular product is no exception. It is peer-reviewed by experts who've experienced these problems in real life. It's easy to implement in your learning management system and includes both support and continuous updates as we review and improve the program. It's designed to save time both in preparation of students and your curriculum, as well as assessment and tracking of their behavior, whether or not they've completed the course. It builds on the application of the RAMP model, which is consistent across our products, uses modern multimedia-friendly format to keep students engaged. It's multi-device friendly, and just like our other safety products, uses formative assessments, which both ensure accountability but keep them engaged as they go through the product. The ultimate outcome is a common understanding across all of the students who take this course, which helps lead to a safety culture within your organization. So some unique course benefits here that differentiate this from anything else on the market. We don't try and teach a student of every possible outcome or safety risk that they can have. Rather, we teach them to think critically using real-world outcomes about the risks, that they can learn how to prepare for the lab and exercise good judgment on a regular basis. It also functions to help ensure that their actions have a risk to life and property, and they maintain a healthy fear as they navigate the laboratory. Finally, there's some expanded course features and benefits that are unique to this course. It is easy to integrate into the upper level undergraduate and graduate curriculum. So if you bring on a batch of new graduate students, one thing that you might do is some onboarding for those students, and this would be a perfect course for that introduction to new grad students. It's designed to equip them with risk-based thinking skills and good habits that last throughout their entire career, again, building on other ACS safety products. And it is an immersive storytelling experience so that we're not lecturing, but we're helping to let them learn the wisdom of the mistakes of others. Again, this prioritizes lab safety as a core competency and benefits the overall culture for an institution as a whole.